The U.S.-led war in Iraq has claimed more than 400,000 lives, along with forced migration, killing 55,000 more. This, according to a survey of 2,000 randomly selected households across Iraq, study taking more than 2 years to complete, and it's been called the most rigorous one of its kind to date. For more on this, I'm joined live by one of the authors of that report, Amy Hagopian from the University of Washington School of Public Health. Thank you very much for joining us here on RT. So why this study now?
We were trying to conduct a survey and an estimate of deaths that more or less approximated the end of the U.S. occupation and provide a summary estimate of deaths from that conflict.
So tell us more about the dead in this conflict according to your categorization. Were more of them civilians, more of them militia? Did you also count deaths from those who were killed in IED attacks and terror attacks after the fall of Saddam?
Let me tell you how we did the study by way of answering your question. We did a very sophisticated sampling method to choose 100 neighborhoods across the country of Iraq, which we chose at random using a population-weighted system and Google Earth and grids and so on, which I won't go into. But it was a very well-selected sample. And we knocked on 20 doors in each of those 100 neighborhoods to get 2,000 households. And we asked every household who lives here, who lived here before the war started, who was born and who died. And if they died, what did they die of? And we were able then to calculate death rates from the period before the war began and the period after the war began. And we multiplied those rates times the population and calculated what we believe is excess mortality. That is the number of people who died who shouldn't have died. And then we're able to tell you a little bit about what they died of. We did not ask people, was the person who died a militant or a combatant or a baker or a bus driver? We, first of all, didn't have time to ask more questions. Second of all, I doubt people would have told us. And third of all, it's sometimes very hard to tell who is a combatant. If you go to work all day as a baker and at night you build a car bomb, what are you exactly, a baker or a car bomb maker?
And so other studies have put the number of casualties significantly less than the one that you came up with. Why do you think that is?
Actually, other studies have been higher. There are at least 3 studies that are higher than ours, and only a couple that are lower. So then why so much deviation from the data you got? Right, because the science on doing these sorts of studies is not as sophisticated as we would like. And it's one of the points I'd like to make, that the science funding agencies in the world ought to consider war to be a very serious public health problem and ought to invest in supporting academics to do this work and refine our methods. Our researchers on this study were all volunteers because no one funds this work.
Why do you think it took, let me rephrase that, how do you think your work can set a new benchmark or a new standard for judging casualties after a big, messy conflict like something that happened in Iraq?
To some extent, I have a lot of confidence in the way we selected the sample and the quality of the people who went door to door and the ability they had to get answers. One major flaw of this study is that households who experienced a great deal of violence were very likely to leave the country. Those who experienced violence tended to be of upper classes and the intelligentsia, and they had the resources to leave the country. Therefore, when we knocked on doors, those people were no longer in Iraq to tell us about the deaths in their households. So we have a survivor bias. That's an epidemiological term. And we are pretty sure we missed a lot of people who might have told us about deaths because those people have left. So we think our count is actually low.
So you have the raw data that you're looking at, obviously. Can you draw any conclusions from that data at this point? Any conclusions, especially as to how the number of deaths could have been reduced?
Well, we know that about a third of the deaths were attributable to something other than direct violence. That is, these are people who died of heart attacks or, some sort of indirect death, cancer, which we think is attributable to the war because it's a death in excess of what should have happened. But it was not as the result of a shooting. So one thing that we can conclude from our study is that war creates a great deal of havoc and disruption in a country. It screws up the water and the health delivery system and the transportation and communication systems, and people die because of that. And we need to get better at counting those deaths so that when countries are contemplating an invasion, they can better calculate what they anticipate the toll will be of that invasion.
Now, there were some polls that you had mentioned that had put the number more than what you had concluded, and there were a couple that, especially some we have from the US and the UK, that show that it was significantly less. What do you think is the discrepancy there between the data that showed less casualties than you had accounted for in your report?
There are two different ways of doing this kind of estimation. Ours is a public health science way, where we do random sampling because that's the most likely way to get a representative proportion of the population. And it has to be a large enough sample, and we conduct surveys and we calculate rates and we do biostatistics. The other camp in this estimation effort does newspaper clippings. So they try to find out all the reports of deaths that have appeared in newspapers or, official reports, those sorts of things. And they collect those and they count deaths. So now, one obvious way in which the two approaches are different is that ours includes indirect deaths and theirs does not. Second of all, it's fairly well established that the newspaper clipping group is going to miss any death that isn't reported. And many deaths in war go unreported to official sources or in the newspaper.
All right. Amy Hagopian from the University of Washington, thank you very much for your time and insight.
It was a pleasure.